Right. Investor perceptions on doing business in Africa are steadily improving. According to the latest survey by global group Ernst Young, so too has foreign direct investment. Let's take a closer look. And as always, we're joined in our studio by resident geo-economic analyst, Mr. William Gumede. It's always a pleasure to see you, sir. Now, according to the latest survey, investor perception on doing business in Africa has improved. Sub-Saharan Africa has jumped from being the third most attractive region in 2011 to now second place in 2014. How important are investor perceptions and really what influences them?
Yeah, no, clearly I think Africa is now the new frontier, as a new growth frontier. Everybody wants to be here. The old industrial powers who for many years were reluctant to invest in Africa, and so on. They're now coming, the new emerging powers like China and India and Brazil, they've moved into Africa in a big way. So I think it's very important that, the shift in perception from where it was negative before, because you must remember, for the last couple of decades, Africa was viewed, in terms of perceptions from outside, is a place where there's only wars, conflicts, hunger, disease, and so on. So it really is important, this shift in perception to a much more positive one, to one actually, of a continent that is growing, a place where you can make money, and so on. So it's very, very important that this has happened.
What's changed those perceptions? I mean, you mentioned the fact that there used to be a reluctance really in doing business in Africa because of the wars and the strife and all of that. What's changed the perceptions now?
Externally, countries like China has been returning back in a bigger way into Africa. India has been coming back onto the continent. Some of the Middle Eastern countries has been coming to invest in the African continent. I think that helped in a very, very big way, because what it did, it changed the perceptions, from Western companies and governments and countries who believed in the past, or who perceived Africa as a dangerous place, as a place where you don't invest, and only few companies invest there. That's the first thing. But secondly, also that African countries have become better in governing. I mean, it's not perfect, and we've got a whole lot of places where we can work on. Yeah. But politically, from a governance point of view, it is starting to get better. And also, African citizens are starting to ask the tough questions and trying to hold their governments accountable.
Now, of course, at the end of the day, there is a huge difference between perception and reality. They're two separate things. Now, FDI does not always follow from perceptions. What causes that gap really between the perception and the reality, and what how people view a country or the continent?
Yeah. I mean, first thing is the start is really the good perceptions, and then as Africans, we then have to do our own action and so on. So, we've already moved, we've sifted the perception. Now we actually ourselves have to start trade also. Amongst ourselves, with each other, because we're not having that. And secondly, also, the investors that we're trying to attract, we have to start to negotiate with them for better deals. And then also, thirdly, what we now need to do is we also now need to use the surplus, the money that we're getting, because people are starting to trade with us, to turn that money into bricks and mortar, to set up factories, to do other kinds of things. And if we do those things, we'll get more investment.
I mean, it's clear that Africa's economic hubs, Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya, they sort of maintain that dominance, but obviously growth needs to be seen on the whole continent at large. So what lessons can be learned from these growth leaders that can be used in other African countries, and what are they doing right?
I think the most probably exciting part of it is we're getting new growth areas. I mean, just look at Rwanda, for example. I mean, a decade ago, it was a failed state. Now it's, some people are saying this is the Singapore of Africa. New players that we're getting now, that's growing. Look at Namibia. Namibia is doing very well in terms of economic growth. And then also Ethiopia also is also growing now. So we have a whole set of new African countries that's now growing. And then, of course, still our traditional, growth countries, Nigeria and so on. But even countries like Kenya. And for me, even more exciting is you know, we now start to get new sectors, growing sectors. Now, in the past, it was just the extractive industries and so on. Now, look at Nigeria. They actually have a film industry that's actually, you know, generating almost 5% of GDP. Look at Kenya, telecommunications, you know, technology, mobile phones is suddenly a sector on its own. I mean, let's just even go to Ethiopia, for example. Yes, suddenly they have a furniture industry and a leather industry that wasn't there before. And for me, that is the exciting part of this new growth phase in Africa.
And do we see continued growth? Do you see investor perceptions continuing to really grow? Do you see it sort of South Africa being more and more attractive?
Exactly. I mean, what we need to do, we have to build on these positive perceptions. And if we build on the positive perceptions, we will going to get a virtuous cycle of new growth coming. Because as more companies come our way, you know, they attract other kinds of companies.
Right. Mr. Gumede, always a pleasure having you here in studio with us. Thank you very much, sir. That's William Gumede, our geo-economic analyst.